So Emmett, tell us a little bit about boot camp.
Well, there were a couple of things that occurred during our basic training. One was a soldier in our outfit from Chicago that didn't want to be in the Army at all, and especially he didn't want to be at Camp Ellis outside of Peoria, Illinois. He wanted to go back to Fort Sheridan, Chicago. So somebody suggested that if he had a fever problem, they might get rid of him and send him back home. And they said, well, use GI soap and rub it in your crotch and under your armpits and your temperature will go up. And sure enough, he tried it. He reported a sick call and his temperature was high, and they put him in the hospital. And after a couple of days, they realized what he was doing with that bar of soap, and they sent him back to the company. And I remember somebody asked him, well, how was it? And he said, man, I itched so bad I could hardly stand it, but I wanted to go to Fort Sheridan. And then we went out on the rifle range to shoot for score, and he couldn't even hit dirt with his M1. And so they had his eyes checked, and he couldn't see the letters on the screen. And he couldn't see numbers, and so they put him out in this. They knew he was sort of fogging the thing, and they put him out in this room in front of a bunch of magazines, and there was a clock way down at the end of the room. And he sat there for over an hour watching the clock and wishing he could read a magazine. And some colonel walked in and said, how you doing? And Tom said, well, I'm doing okay, but I got this sight problem. And talked a while, and this colonel said, my gosh, he said, I lost my watch. He said, you got any idea what time it is? And Tom looked up and said, whatever the time it was on the clock. And they talked a while, and the colonel left, and called him back in the examining room, and they asked him what time it was, and Tom knew he'd had it. But somehow he got sent back to Fort Sheridan. I don't know how he did it, but he got there. And then we had a first sergeant that was a Brazilian. And two things I remember about him was that the first week we were there, he handed us a 30-06. And the message we got was, gentlemen, I've just handed you the finest killing weapon in the world, a 30-006, and they never repeat anything like this again. 2 weeks later, they took away the 30-06 and handed us the M1, the Garand M1. And he said, gentlemen, I've just handed you the finest killing weapon in the world, and never find another weapon like this again. And then we took the M1 out in the rifle range, and I shot a 296 out of 300. Sergeant Bargo had a 295, and for a long time he thought he was battalion high until some officer pointed out that some private had beat him. And then after that, after the scores came out, the company commander gave me a 3-day pass starting on Friday. Well, where am I going to go all by myself to Peoria? I didn't know anybody, so I decided to hang around camp. But Sergeant Vargas got hold of me, and he's going to make me humble, and he put me on KP for 3 days. So on Monday morning, when the company met out front, the captain addressed me, and he said, Schmitz, he said, how'd you enjoy your 3-day pass? And I saw Bargo just about dying his boots. And I said, I had a wonderful time, thank you. And from that moment on, Sergeant Bargo never gave me any more details. I didn't pull KP, I didn't keep the boilers going, I didn't have to clean the latrine, I didn't even have to clean the floor, the floor on the barracks. I just had a pretty easy time on basic training from then on.